Welcome to White Pill Radio, the roughly every other episode version of Theology on Air, which is an outgrowth of Theology by the Pint, which is a ministry in Houston where we gather around craft beer and really interesting conversations on theology and politics and ethics and philosophy and scripture and all kinds of interesting things like that. But this particular podcast is a post-apologetic, ultimately hopeful commentary on news events from a Christian point of view. I like to say that this is blessed talk, but not happy talk. So we are going to do our best to look at news stories in the zeitgeist today from a Christian point of view, offer a hopeful word, perhaps in response to what is not always good news. And to do that, we have a full crew today. But first, we want to tell you to go to theologybythepint.org.
Yep.
Theologybythepint.org. You can learn about our upcoming events. You can learn how to donate so that we can do things like this at no charge, right? We're not monetized anywhere. Right? Anything like that. Find our podcast, subscribe to that. That really helps. YouTube. Argue with people on YouTube. I think YouTube comments help the algorithm. Is that right?
Oh, fun.
Let's get more into it then.
Yeah.
We only do that like once every 5 episodes.
Yeah, why do we do that on our text thread? We need to do it on the YouTube
On the
video.
YouTube chat, yeah.
Yes.
Dang it.
So YouTube, Theology by the Pint, YouTube, and all the places. Do that. But who is with me today?
I'm Sarah Stone. I'm the executive director for Theology by the Pint. And while I have the mic, if you're watching, you can see I have a cool water bottle, and so does Ken. Water bottles and t-shirts and hoodies and tote bags and all kinds of things are going to be available at our next event. We're busting out the merch station. So if you come on May 13th, we're going to be talking about creation and evolution. And you can create, only God can create, but you can assemble your own t-shirt. We have a heat press and you can make it however you want. It's like a choose your own adventure.
You can naturally select what you want to be on it.
Naturally select, given the options that we have available for you. Yes. So come to that. It's going to be fun.
Awesome. I'm Taylor Neal. I studied philosophical apologetics at HBU.
They're Christian now.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, HCU.
They used to be Baptist, but now they're Christian.
Right. No comment on that. So that's me, local loudmouth opinionated guy, and sometimes guest on the program.
It's funny you say that because of the four of us, I think you're the least loud-mouthed opinionated. We'll find out.
Hey.
And I'm Ken. I'm an accountant.
Oh my gosh. And Ken is on our board and he volunteers with us, and you can see him at all of our events. He'll probably hand you your beer tickets.
And he got a haircut.
Yeah, I'm not a long hair hippie anymore. I'm just a short hair hippie. So
Can you even be a hippie with short hair?
I'll try.
Listen to his views. You'll see.
Raise that mic up a little bit, just a smidge. Okay. All right. Well, I thought I'd start us off today with some sad news, which is that the Pope died.
What?
Yeah, it happened. And so there's an interesting kind of reckoning going on. Every time the Pope dies, there's this sort of kind of hushed conversation about what the future of the Catholic Church looks like and what his pontificate symbolized or meant for the world. By the way, did Benedict ever die?
Is he dead yet? I don't know.
Is that a dumb
I
question?
don't know
He was like the first to
He went to like a monastery, right?
retire in like 500 years.
Yeah.
I can't even remember if he's still alive. Anyway,
One of you should know that.
yeah,
We're not Catholic.
I
I'm not
totally
Catholic.
Roman Catholic.
because it would be pretty wild if he's still alive and like a whole other pontificate went. Anyway, there's a lot of scandal about why he was forced into retirement, but we'll put that for another day. So, Francis was sort of known for being like extremely modest, and he lived humbly. He was a social justice like OG, a liberation theologian from South America, like in the 60s. That's where he cut his teeth. So he clearly believed all that. He roiled a lot of us in the conservative space because he said, who am I to judge, on questions of homosexuality. It's like, well, you're the Pope. I thought that was like your number one job to make judgments on this sort of thing. But all that said, now it's he appointed, I think, something like 70% of the cardinals that will be electing the new Pope. So if he sort of nominated people in his mold, then there's a concern that the Catholic Church will sort of become more and more liberal or progressive. And I guess one of my thoughts is that there should not be a such thing as a liberal or progressive or, sort of conservative cardinal. Like the job of a cardinal, if the Catholic Church really is what it says that it is, and I'm sorry there's no Catholics here to defend against their,
We're all part of the Catholic Apostolic Church.
Well, that is true, little c Catholic.
Yeah.
But there really should not be such a thing as a word in front of a cardinal, like a cardinal or a bishop or a priest or a pope. They should be of one mind because
Like
that's what the Catholic Church says that it is. They are office holders who are preserving the truth passed down through the apostolic succession, and they're preserving this tradition, century after century after century, and yet the very fact that we're debating about whether the next pope might be also progressive or more progressive or a conservative going back, I think it kind of belies the fact that the Catholic Church is actually, this is my hot take, an article I'm working on right now, is too big, and it really, for its own sake, desperately needs to, I would say reform.
Splinter.
Yeah. I think they
did that Reformation thing once.
It's kind of a big deal.
And I think it's technically impossible for them to do it because of their structure.
Well, I mean, there was that whole Vatican II thing. That was interesting. It didn't really go very far, but
it actually created like something like the Society of Pope Pius X, which was a throwback conservative. So they believe the papal seat is currently vacant, sedi vacantis, or whatever. So there are those sorts of kind of schismatic groups out there. There are also personal ordinariate Catholics, which are like the Anglicans who kind of rolled into Catholicism. And so their priests can marry, for example. There are Byzantine Catholics, kind of Eastern Rite Catholics. There are other avenues, I think. There are actually other kind of Catholic churches where I think at some point, if it keeps going the way that it's going, there are millions and millions of Roman Catholics who are going to say, we cannot keep going like this. And I'm not happy about that, but I think the fact that there is a recognition that there are progressive or liberal cardinals, and when you put that word in front of someone who is not a personality, but an office bearer, and they therefore think they have the freedom to pursue a progressive agenda or something like that, when it is fundamentally opposed to everything they exist for, which is to preserve tradition.
Conserve it, even.
Well, in all fairness, though, these labels are not self-selected. These are generally labels that we give them, right, that represent different kind of philosophical strains of thought and different strains within Catholic theology.
Yeah, that's true.
John Paul II
doesn't make it wrong.
Yeah, John Paul II, like railing against the atrocities of various socialist and communist regimes. Like he was hailed as like the capitalist pope, but like it wasn't something he gave himself, right? Yeah.
Well, and so they do this thing often where they kind of oscillate. Where like the Rottweiler, Benedict XVI, he's this like arch conservative. I mean, he was literally the head of the Inquisition. The Congregation for Doctrine and Faith. That's what the Inquisition was. So he's about as like conservative as any modern pope could ever be. And then there's like this pendulum swing back the other way. And so then there's a thought, like, I think there's one guy sort of thought of as in the running where like it would swing back the conservative way. It just seems like there's this, well, I'll give a little, I'll take a little. It's kind of like how the American government works, where like both sides sort of get what they want, but there's never any accountability as a result of that.
And by the way, this is what a lot of Christians or people that look at Christianity have a problem with, is that it ought to be that the Pope or any pastor or ministry leader should be just interpreting the truth of Scripture. And so it should be the same across time and cultures, right?
It's a lot like the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Ideologically.
That's why I said judges earlier.
Yes.
But it's not.
Well, I mean, try to get like originalist opinions on the like Bill of Rights. Like, I mean, looking at old documents, you're going to have like lots of different opinions depending on who's reading it. Like interpretations, even. Yeah.
That's what I was going with. That.
Yeah.
The many interpretations thing is kind of wild for people on the outside looking in. Like, well, how can I believe any of this? And y'all just all have different interpretations of Scripture. It's tough.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting because, and maybe to Evan's point about the church being too big, these kinds of theological differences wouldn't need to be such a point of contention if there wasn't such power centralized in the Pope and in Rome. Because, I mean, like this program kind of exists to bring in different perspectives within Christianity, and none of us, fight about it. I mean, like we have some spirited debates sometimes, but generally there's no blood spilled, and everybody kind of coexists and doesn't have any interest in breaking fellowship over a lot of the things that we disagree about. I think what forces the issue is when you have power vested in someone such that they're an authority for some people equal to the Word of God. And then the differences start to matter a lot more.
I'm glad you said that. That's a great point. I mean, in fact, I'm using one of the recent Pope's quotes as part of the marketing for our August event. We're going to the Woodlands in August, and we're going to be talking about all paths lead to heaven kind of thing. I mean, we're actually titling it, Do I Have to Go to Church to Get to Heaven? So come and find out. If you're not going to church, be nervous. No. But of course, he made that, last September, he said that thing about all these religions are just different pathways to the same truth. That's a pretty far cry from what the Bible says.
He put people to death for believing that.
Yeah.
Not that long ago.
Which, like, honestly, I would settle for somewhere in the middle. of putting somebody to death and being
Yeah.
like, oh, it's all like,
Right. One big happy family. Yeah. I would
don't
settle
know.
for something in the middle too.
yeah.
I think going back to the
You want to bring back crusades and
You wanna stone
inquisitions?
people.
not really, but I mean like I think at this point debating. I mean, talk to like James White about it, like who's debated more Catholics than anyone since the Reformation, and including in my church. He debated Trent Horn on Sola Scriptura last year, for example, and he will tell you that like Mormons, it's getting harder and harder to find like conservative traditional Roman Catholics who hold the line, like who hold the old line. So his debates in the 1990s were with people who were like basically kind of a pre-Vatican II mindset, and now it's getting harder to find people. I mean, and I have tried to put together a number of debates, and in like screening out Catholic priests and professors from like certain schools that may be in town. And it's like I talk to them, and they're like, "Well, you know, I don't really want to defend this, or I don't really want to defend that. I'd be interested in a multi-faith conversation, or you know, some kind of cordial conversation where it's like respectful." I'm like, no, that's boring. No, I want a pro and a con, bro. I want a yes and a no. I want
Real answers.
I want to die on this hill. You know, the gospel's at stake. Human souls matter.
Evan, you're gonna have to die a lot of times because I think there's a lot of hills.
I'm dying on so many hills at this point.
So it might be boring, but I actually think that those one-on-one conversations are where a lot of magic happens.
Yeah.
Because, you mentioned, he said, like, kind of the all paths things. Well, obviously, I don't agree with that. I'm a conservative Christian, and so I have a biblical view. But
That's a sentence.
but I would like to kind of hold space for at least a distinction between people that are saying, like, all religions are a path to God, and people that are saying, perhaps, Jesus can do whatever he wants to. He can reach people in ways that we may not anticipate and that may not look like the normal experience.
Sure.
I always like to say I'm a hopeful universalist. There's like only
Y'all
three
need to
passages.
save this conversation for August, man.
Yeah, there's
Maybe
only
you need to
like
be on the
3
panel.
passages in Scripture that you could plausibly interpret as universalist. But like, no, I don't want people to go to hell. Like, I want God to save everyone. I want
does
Jesus
God.
to save everyone. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I will say, I just started doing something where I talk to college students, but I'm recording it, and it's on our church YouTube channel now. So
The
if you go to
Stephen
First
Crowder.
Lutheran Houston's YouTube channel, and I had a long conversation with a Catholic young man, and we talked about a lot of this, and it was, anyway,
Do you
might
have
find
the-
that interesting.
Do you have the
That-
change my mind table?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
kidding.
You'll see it. Yeah. No, it's explicit. It says,
So and so and so
God
changed my
exists,
mind.
Jesus is God. Marriage is male, female. Abortion is wrong.
It's sort of like the
Bible is real,
antithesis to
change
the
my
love
mind.
is love,
Sure.
those rainbow signs that
Yeah,
came
yeah.
out.
No, that's a
In
different
this
sign,
house, we
Oh, just
believe.
kidding.
but
yeah.
it's similar. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
What's up? Next.
Can I pick on you one more time before we move on?
Of course.
On the Pope thing?
Yes.
So you said that like the Pope's job was basically to be judge over right and wrong. This is another one of those
Yeah.
places where I think that like we talk past each other, and maybe in one-on-one conversation these things get fleshed out, because there is a distinction between judging a person and I'm going to distinguish between right and wrong behavior, right? Like we could call both judgment.
Yeah.
But
right.
one is actually required of Christians and one's forbidden for
Right.
Christians.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's a
The word judgment has connotations and denotations.
yeah.
And yeah.
Like the semantic range or whatever of
Yeah.
a word. It's quite broad. So yes.
So
Yeah,
one
we-
more plug for talking to each other instead of fighting.
No. I agree with you. I mean, so if he was saying, "Who am I to judge?" in the sense that I'm not going to send someone to hell, okay.
Right.
But if he's saying, "Who am I to judge?" as in I can't even say that this behavior is right or wrong.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Because they literally put people to
and
death.
even
for
Jesus
poverty.
said so
Well,
in
no-
the same passage where he talked
Right.
about not judging.
Not even
Judge
I'm
right.
going to send someone to hell, but to say like you are going to hell, right?
As an objective.
I mean, we
statement.
have like tons of scriptures like the way is narrow, right? Many have said, "Lord, Lord," didn't
Yeah.
I X, Y, and
1
Z, and
Corinthians
say I
6.
never knew you.
Yeah.
Like to say this person is going to hell. I don't know. I hope that there's a lot of people in heaven, and we're going to be asking like, "Hey, how did X, Y, and Z get in here?" Yeah.
And I'm glad they're here.
But
Yeah.
there's also going to be a lot of people who's like, "Hey, where's so and so?"
Mm, it's a cheery take.
Yeah.
Ken, thanks for that.
Sorry.
Listen, today's the day, people. Someone sing Just As I Am. We're going to do this right here on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay, tell us about RFK
Okay.
sparking outrage.
Yeah, so RFK said some things recently. So he gave a speech, and a lot of it was centered around, it was a Make America Healthy Again kind of speech, but it was really centered around autism. And a lot of us who are in the autism community, I have a child on the spectrum, really felt like he painted with way too broad a brush, made some statements of fact that I think at best are questionable. And it's meaningful to me because I really want to know what the truth is. And, you've heard me say it before, Sarah, but like anytime an issue becomes political, the debate around it becomes very stupid. And then it becomes hard to find out what's really going on. And so, when I sit back and listen to him say that, the rise in autism cases is due almost completely to environmental factors and other things. It's not due to better identification and more awareness and things like that and more testing. Well, like, says who? Because
But isn't that his whole thing is let's find out?
Well, I would love it if that was his whole thing. But
Okay.
that's not the way that he presented, because I want to know that answer too.
Yeah.
But I've done a fair amount of research on this, and I haven't been able to find much. And the study that he used actually stops in 2014,
Mm-hmm.
and there's been major shifts since then.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, girls are much more likely
Mhm.
today to be diagnosed with autism because it presents differently in girls, as it turns out.
Okay.
And so, to say that it's a myth that you can account for a huge amount of the increase with better diagnostic techniques, I'm not so sure. And it's also not just the diagnostics. It's that there's school programs now that are there to identify it with administrators that are trained to identify autism early in kids.
Let me ask you this though, and I didn't hear the speech, so maybe he did. He probably did paint with too broad a brush. I don't love everything he says, but I listened to a podcast recently talking about the uptick in numbers, like a strong uptick in numbers, even if some of that's accounted for by these better diagnostics. Why don't we see an older generation of like 70s and 80s stemming and being nonverbal? And I mean, yeah.
I got to tell you.
Okay.
I
You
almost
hate
pulled
that argument?
I almost pulled my hair out when I heard him say that. Because there is a huge amount of older people who were undiagnosed as kids who are realizing today that they're on the spectrum. A lot of them are going and getting diagnosed. A lot of those are women. But there's a lot of other people who are just incorporating that information. And, now they're good at masking. They've got their coping skills. They don't stand out so bad. Maybe they're a little bit quirky. A lot of engineers, incidentally, for my math people out there, are on the spectrum. And so there is a huge amount of older people being diagnosed. And the disparity is not so great. I think it's 1 in 40 adults versus 1 in 31 kids. That's not the kind of discrepancy that he's describing there.
So do you think it's genetic then?
I think, from the best I can tell from the data, there seems to be a genetic component to it. Now, I also accept and think that there are environmental factors. I think that, similar to a lot of other conditions, you can be predisposed to something, and then the environmental factor may switch on or switch off.
Sure, like an autoimmune disease.
Right.
Isn't the biggest correlator like women over like 30, right? If you have kids when you're younger, you're less likely to. And if you have kids when you're older, you're more likely to. Right?
That would point to
It's
it
so
being
much
genetic.
stronger correlation than like
Yeah.
vaccines.
Right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Well,
You've done the
I'll
research.
have a study
That's
that proves
to the
you
best of
wrong.
my understanding. That's right. But
Well, okay,
but the
but-
other thing that I want to point out is, like, I want to be modest about the claims that I make here, because I've done so much work trying to find out and understand this.
Hey
better.
guys, Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
That we don't know as much as he seems to think. And so that I was also kind of offended by that. It's just not that I disagreed. And by the way, I'm generally supportive of RFK and the Make America Healthy Again movement. But for me, he really stepped in it here.
Fair.
Yeah, I think got way over his skis. And before I forget to say it, it's not just the better diagnostic methods. There's also a much broader definition of autism
Right.
today. And you know, that
I mean, what is autism?
we all sit around and debate about it,
Right.
and nobody takes the time to define it. So I pulled a definition here.
Cool.
Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition that affects how a person interacts with others, communicates, learns, and behaves. It's characterized by deficits in social communication and interaction, along with restrictive and sometimes repetitive behaviors, interests, or activities. The difference can manifest in a variety of ways, making autism a spectrum disorder where individuals have a wide range of abilities and needs.
That definition could be half the men I dated.
That's
I'm not even joking.
Exactly. So if I think maybe a more narrow definition would be helpful.
Right. Okay.
Such as it is.
But here's what happens, because this is an article from NPR. The first quote they have from him is, "These are kids who will never pay taxes.
Yeah.
They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date." He is talking about people on the spectrum, at one end of the
The
spectrum,
severe end.
who wear diapers, who will be cared for by their parents their entire lives, and who will die one day and will need the state to probably take care of them.
Well,
right.
And that is on the spectrum. And he is saying that is a whole lot more people now than it was then.
Well, hold on. The asylum system. You know how many people died in the asylum system because
What
of
does that
horrible?
have to do with this?
Well, the people that are in diapers and like pulling out their hair and
Yeah.
like banging their heads against walls, right?
Yeah. So were
Back
they
in the day,
autistic?
well, the reason why that we didn't have we don't have as many 80-year-old autism people that on that far into the spectrum today is because back in the 70s and
locked them
80s,
up and-
yeah, back in the 70s and 80s, they were in horrible facilities with horrible conditions who just
Well,
died.
They also received totally different diagnosis. If
And
any
that
at
too,
all.
yeah.
Right.
Oh, it wasn't called autism back then, but you
Right.
would get locked in an asylum because you're a danger to yourself and others.
But
Right.
do we dispute that?
Everybody, by the way, previous to 2013, who was ever diagnosed with Asperger's is now diagnosed with autism.
Right.
So that's,
That used to be the low end of the
Right.
spectrum.
and I'm glad you brought up what he said about kids that are completely debilitated by this disorder, because he said it in connection with this figure he gave. 26% of these new cases are severe, quote unquote severe.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, what does that mean? He didn't bother to tell us. So I went and I found, best I can tell, again, because it doesn't seem to be any firm definition, but the consensus generally is that one can be considered severe if any of the following criteria attach. An IQ below 50, okay, we agree. Nonverbal or very limited speech, okay. Experience great distress in unfamiliar situations. That sounds
That's
like
most
half the men
people.
you date,
Yeah.
right? So, according to these definitions, autism could be a debilitating mental disorder, or even people that have it severe, maybe it's just a different way to be. So again, it feels extremely imprecise, and I'm a little uncomfortable with how aggressively we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And so, kind of calling back to our previous discussion, what I'm really looking for is, maybe for everybody, both sides, just to kind of put down the spears for a second, and let's kind of talk about it.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Do you think that there has been gold standard research into this problem?
It's really hard to say. I mean,
Right.
both sides
So
would tell you yes. The problem is they're
No,
coming
he
up with
wouldn't. He would say
conflicting-
there isn't.
He would say, as a matter of fact, there is not. In fact, I'll lend you my Vax Unvax book downstairs that he wrote a few years ago, and he will tell you that on this vaccine, on this vaccine, on this vaccine, on this vaccine, there have been no gold standard
That's
placebo-controlled
interesting
studies
because
for
he's
any of
careful
them.
not to mention the word vaccine in all.
Maybe
of
he
his
knows that
speeches.
everyone thinks
Yeah.
it makes him crazy.
Well, the point is the whole Maha movement is built around the identification of the problem that the fox is guarding the hen house. Okay, so if there is chronic disease and a whole slew of them, and if they are inaugurated by problems with the food supply, by the vaccines, by environmental contaminants,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Who is doing the study? It ain't the FDA. It's
Yeah.
not USDA. It's none of the
Right. Well, and-
organizations that are in. Let me finish.
Yeah.
That are infiltrated with corporate cronies who go back and forth between government and the corporation in the lobbyist efforts, et cetera. That is why they want to put in place the policies to say, no, you don't get to go from industry to regulation and back and forth again. Where you're supposedly regulating your friends.
But how does that connect to autism?
From my
Because
one
you can't
does-
find out what the cause of autism is
Yeah.
unless you have gold standard science
It's being
that
gatekept.
is done by objective people without an axe to grind, or without trying to protect the pharmaceutical industry or protect the fertilizer industry, the genetic modified food industry, et cetera, et cetera.
By the way, he would say that very good studies have been done to demonstrate that it's due to environmental factors.
Oh, I've heard him say I'm not trying to say that it's environmental factors. I'm trying to say we need research.
He says
let me
both.
let me ask
He
one
talks a
more-
lot and he says both.
Okay.
Let me ask one more question though. Because I listened to someone talking about this, and they talked about a 2018 study that, given interviews of thousands of parents of autistic children, a lot of them say that it was regressive autism, as in they were developing normally for 18 months or 2 years or 3 years or something like that. Then all of a sudden something changed. That's the reason that people suspect vaccines, because environmental toxins take a while to build up, etc.
Right.
But vaccines can cause an effect instantly.
Okay, but hold on.
Yeah. So I'm not objecting to that. I don't know, but I do know that around 2 years is when it becomes diagnostically relevant, because autistic kids that are born autistic, there's no question about whether they were affected by vaccines or whatever. They still really don't have their hands around it. Still really can't put a diagnosis on it until they're around that age.
Because they need a certain level of development to notice a lack of
Correct.
development.
So it's just, I mean, I would say it's hard to tell. Now, what you were saying about the different agencies and the corruption that exists and that fogs up all the science and stuff, from my perspective, that's not objectionable. I'm with you on that. And one critique I would have of the other side is that they say, well, hey, it's not important what causes it. We just need to be focused on, better treatment and better response to autism. Well, I don't agree with that either necessarily. I want to know what the truth is.
Not to mention, because if it is environmental, even in part, and you start to remove those,
even if it's only 15% of the supposed increase is due to environmental factor, well, that's a problem.
well, it also
So I
means
wanna-
it's a
on scale,
continual
that's
thing, like that
millions
a
of
child
people.
that has it now could be benefited by
Right.
not eating glyphosate or whatever. Ken, you've been trying to say something.
Oh well, I was just going to say, like, this kind of post hoc rationalization where you start with a conclusion, then you go backwards and try to
My
figure it out.
judgment also.
Like I could do that with anything. You know, like your immigrant friends, well, not yours, but your immigrant friends. I'm kidding. That have that little scar right
Yeah,
here
from
on
the
their
vaccine.
shoulder.
Yeah.
Like that's from a tuberculosis vaccine that we don't give our kids anymore because we don't need to. But in like third world countries south of the equator, like everyone's going to have that, right? Now, you could look at that and then look at autism rates in America and look at autism rates in third world countries and say, wow, they don't have a lot of autism. America does. Maybe
because we need to do more of
we
those
need to give
vaccines.
more tuberculosis vaccines to people. I could post hoc rationalize anything. You know the ice cream and crime statistic.
Yeah.
Correlation and causation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
I think
But
we
the-
all agree about that. The question is, I think what I've heard from RFK, and I agree with you that this might be too broad, but I've heard him say, I just want good studies done. Because I think all of us have our eyes open enough to know that we put crap in our bodies, and crap is put into the air around us, into the water around us. So if that could be affecting it, wouldn't it be nice to know?
So maybe some discipline is what's needed around this issue. Because if he had said that from the podium,
It would have been golden.
you wouldn't hear a peep out of me.
Yeah. Because who doesn't want more research on something that could help people?
Well, I mean, he said he expects preliminary answers by September, and then sort of final results about a year from then. So
And we're
I
getting rid of
think-
those food
and
dyes.
he is saying-
That's kind of where I start to suspect, and I don't know, but I start to suspect the kind of post hoc rationalization that Ken was talking about, because if we don't know yet, and most of the researchers seem very, very skeptical about that timeline, but if you don't know, then how do you know you can solve it by a certain date, unless you already know what your
The
answer's gonna
conclusion.
be. Right. And by the way, there's only about 7% of kids on the spectrum that are in that severe category have issues with incontinence and toileting and bathing themselves and stuff like that. So it's not 26%.
Yeah.
No. I'm. My point is that NPR, it makes it sound like he is saying everyone on the spectrum can't use the bathroom, and that's not what he's saying. I'm sure that in the whole quote he would have said, "Yeah, there's a spectrum."
He shot himself in the foot on that, Evan. Like,
You think?
I accept that's
Go listen to
probably not
the-
what he meant, because he did go and try to clean it up
Yeah.
in subsequent interviews.
Okay.
But he
in that interview, it
yeah.
was autistic people can't pay taxes. And it was really frustrating.
he tried to connect it to that severe.
Well, I'm just reading the article
category.
where the soundbite of the archived recording begins in the middle of a statement he's making, where he says, "These are kids who will never pay taxes." He's not saying he is. If the words preceding that were something like, "There is a spectrum of autism, and there is a high functioning autist, and there are severe cases," And in the severe cases, there are kids who will not pay taxes. I don't know.
But
what
you
said.
listen to the whole
right,
thing.
and he.
But I mean,
he quoted
NPR
that
is all-
26% severe in connection with that,
Gotcha.
and that was one part that I stood up.
I mean, I know NPR would never
no,
want to paint their
That's-
enemies.
This is a
Exaggerate.
topic that demands that precision, though.
well, and that's
Yeah.
that's another thing that I wanted to
From NPR.
raise
From
today
anyone.
is
From
that it's
RFK
kind
too.
of it was kind of upsetting for me that the only sources I could find for an article as the pretext to this discussion were all ideologically slanted.
Sure.
And I think that's too bad. I wish we were having a more balanced discussion around this.
The question
Agreed.
is there science available to us? Is there a way to do science that answers this question in a way where the majority of us, because we don't even all agree the sky is blue. So in a way where we say, okay, the science is clear.
Right.
It's a handful of factors. It affects people differently. I mean, I don't know.
Look, I think that's somewhere we could come together. More research is definitely
That would be, I mean, I would
needed.
say the white pill is that if he means what he says, and I think he does, because I think he's an honest broker, that he wants to do gold standard science, and that has not been done on these questions. I think that's a good thing.
I think there's another white pill, which is even if it turns out that all the crap that we eat and drink and breathe has nothing to do with autism, but we still cut them out, we will be better.
No question.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hope that actually will help everything, including people on the spectrum.
Whatever your underlying conditions may be, eating poorly is going to exacerbate those things.
Yes.
So that's again not objectionable.
All right. Let's talk about something else that's not objectionable. I put an article in here just
Anymore.
as it's just a little bit of a palate cleanser because we're always talking about people we disagree with. So I thought I would give us a little glimmer of hope. This article is about Keir Starmer. He's the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And basically, I don't need to really read anything, but it's just that he has come out and finally said, like point blank, and they asked him several different ways, and he kept coming back and saying the same thing, that transgender women, excuse me, he does not believe transgender women are women. And of course, that will affect the way that they do bathrooms. That a transgender woman, which some of us in this room would say is a man, I would say, excuse me, is not a woman, so can't be using women's bathrooms. And people have come back at him and, is that what you really meant? Is that what you've always thought? And he's just like, I won't quote the whole thing because there might be children listening, but he basically paints out what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman and, explains that. I think we all understand that. I thought this was a little bit of a breath of fresh air, partly because we're always talking about how liberal the UK is and they're, I don't know, taking the whole world down before us or something. But in this case, at least, this representative from England, the Prime Minister, I think is saying a true thing. And
Yeah.
it's just refreshing. So,
I think you should be arrested for hate speech.
oh my gosh.
I think, and I'm only half joking because in the UK, if you are on a street corner,
Mhm.
proclaiming Christian truth, or you're praying silently outside an abortion clinic,
Right.
you will be arrested. So
Mhm.
I think by their own standard, it's interesting to me that he also says basically, or the spokesperson said, a woman is a biological woman. That is set out clearly by the court judgment, and it's like, did we need a court?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes me a little nervous too. That there are some axiomatic realities, truths that just need to be foundational to.
Mhm.
And not able to be overturned later because of,
Yes. I mean, whatever they give, they can take away. So what
Mhm.
happens if a court later says that? I think what we have sort of going for us is actually, I guess, feminism, right? I mean, this is the J.K. Rowling point of view, right? That
Mhm.
that women are saying you're actually taking from you have minority groups duking it out, and the women in this case won.
Yeah.
So
Agreed. Do you mean the cervix holders? Because that was part of the.
Birthing persons, right?
No. In this article, it
Oh,
talks
it's
about.
what he
that is a
said?
new one.
Yeah.
I have not
I had
heard,
not heard
cervix
holder.
It doesn't say cervix holders, but it talks about women having a cervix. I think. Well, I think they did that because if you talk about certain genitalia, then you'll find the 1% that are born with some, malformation, and so it's like, well, they still have a cervix on the inside. So there you go. As the only cervix holder here, I say we go to the next article. That's all I got on that
Well,
one.
I'm glad that he acknowledges reality. That's a good start. So
Yeah.
The next article is one I wrote for my shared Substack, Everyman Commentary. You can find it at everymancommentary.substack.com. And basically, it's about economics and all the stock market crashes and the tariffs and everything going on. And it's titled "Choose Your Stock Market Adventure." You mentioned "Choose Your Own Adventure," and so that's kind of the idea. And my point is basically that the market is due for a correction, and the kind of global, kind of worldwide way we think about economics, given our relationship to China, given trade deficits, given our currency, et cetera, like we're due for a correction. So basically, there will be one that takes place naturally, and I think what Trump is essentially doing is forcing the issue, and he's willing to take some pain now, which politicians will never, ever, ever do. Yeah. And I think he has basically said, hey, it's going to be rough for a while until we get this sorted out, but it's worth it in the long run because we can't continue to have these trade deficits. Now, my one criticism, I mean, I don't say this in the article.
You didn't put it in the article.
I would say that he has brought up a balanced budget, but he's not insisting on it. And I think, therefore, there is a little bit of speaking out of both sides of his mouth, that you can't basically force the world to adapt to our tariffs and our dollar, and then continue to weaken the dollar by printing money because we're spending more money that we don't have.
The weak dollar theory, is that something that you're subscribing to with like the people that are trying
the
to...
idea that he is deliberately
the mind readers that saying Trump is trying to weaken the dollar, is that one of your theories or no?
I'm not smart enough to speculate as to whether he's playing that particular 4D or 5D chess game or anything like that.
All right.
I mean, but I don't know. To be honest, I don't know.
Choose your own adventure. You mentioned the 5 fundamental flaws that the current market has. Like, go through the 5, because I want to talk about 3 of them being fundamental misunderstandings, and 2 of them being things that like Trump himself is just guilty of. Right? You're saying that Trump has identified 5 fundamental flaws in the market and in the current economy, but like 2 of those, are things he's like just straight up guilty of. Monetary policy. He's bullying Jerome Powell right now for artificially low interest rates. The thing that in Trump won.
He's off that now.
Is he?
Yeah. He just, earlier today said, no, he's fine. His job is fine. Because the stock market's got itchy.
No,
and twitchy.
I reject the Federal Reserve. I reject using interest rates as a gas pedal or a brake pedal to sort of roil markets or slow them down. I think that's insane and ridiculous. I think markets naturally have, bubbles that will burst, and there's some pain, and then there's growth, and I think that's inevitable because people are constantly looking for a store of value, and they'll over-evaluate a certain market segment, et cetera, et cetera. But the way that is done by manipulating, our monetary supply.
But that's not what happened in the 2008 collapse that you were talking about, though.
What?
Well, in the article you mentioned, the market is due for a correction just like it was in 2008, right? Due to our underlying due to these 5 things: trade imbalances, supply chain, monetary policy, Wall Street versus Main Street, and deficit spending, right? Yeah. Those 5 things, that's not at all why the market crashed in 2008. 2008 was about collateral debt, collateralized debt obligations.
Yeah, I'm not equating the 2 things. What I said, you're talking about my first sentence?
About my
hypothetical? Read it.
Post 9/11 and 2008. Yeah,
okay.
Let's go.
Just read me the first
Do you have
paragraph.
it pulled up?
Sure.
All right.
Okay.
Go for it.
All right. If steps could have been taken in 2006 to avoid the 2008 market crash, would you say that they should have been?
Okay, so you're not saying that these underlying market fundamental failures...
They're completely different things.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, cool. I'm saying hypothetically, if you know that...
Pain now for gain later.
Pain now or worse, pain later. What do you do? I think that Trump is willing to take a pain now approach. Now, is he doing everything that I would like? No. What I believe he should be doing, first of all, is saying every single day to that ridiculous idiot from my hometown that is running the House, is say, why are you on vacation? Why are you fools not at work every single day hashing out a budget? It will be a balanced budget or we'll shut down the government. I will not sign this budget into play until it's a balanced budget. That is what I think Trump should be doing. I think that Trump should tell...
He did the opposite with Thomas Massie, though.
No, I'm aware. I totally disagree with that. I think he's at least talking about a balance.
You didn't say that in the article, though.
You need to write a counter article.
I would love to.
Well, tell you what, you can start a Substack and you can write articles and, et cetera.
Can I ask you a question, though? When you talk about pain now for gain later, I think some of the conservative angst is that the pain now is going to cost us red seats.
Sure,
You know,
that's
like if
always
there's a lot of
that's-
economic downturn, then
Yeah.
the Democrats will take
That's why
over.
he needs to do this like now,
Well, and
so that a
also
year from
that's-
now we might be already be on the upswing.
You started off by saying no politicians will actually
Mhm.
do like embrace
Right.
the pain in
That's
the
what made
short
me think
term
of it.
for a long term result, and as a result of that, we've had a whole bunch of short term interests kind of guiding the policy of
Mhm.
our country, and obviously over time that has deleterious effects. So I'm kind of with you on that, and if we lose some seats, we lose some seats. But if ultimately, if he's right, and these things he's doing, work out to the benefit of the American people, there'll be a correction in that way as well, and there will be more red seats gained back, and maybe we'll see a president.
There
JD Vance.
are other things that need to be done for those red seats. I would
Mhm.
say at least three. One is census reform, because California gets something like 5 or 6
Mhm.
seats as a result of counting illegals. Two would be election reform, because I think they cheat and they're.
This is the first I'm hearing of this.
Yes, yeah, I think they cheat in elections. I know it's
Well, but with the
shocking.
current configuration, the seats still are what they are. There will
Yes,
be
yes.
there will be an impact, and that is
Yeah.
part of maybe the short term
Yeah,
pain.
yeah.
The only thing I found here that I've got significant questions about is the trade imbalances, and we don't have to beat this around if you don't want, because this is something that's been debated a lot. And
Yeah.
people are going to be aware of it. But when Thomas Sowell says that something is bad policy,
That's a pretty good sign it might be.
I'm just going to say
Yeah.
that thing is definitely bad policy. Now,
That's the fight. The fight is between the nationalist populist economic approach and the Thomas Sowell, Ronald Reagan, Milton Friedman approach. That is the fight. That's the paradigm shift.
You got
in the Republican
Navarro
Party.
and Bannon.
Right.
Like, we got like Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. I
Right.
think we're good.
So it's a free trade versus a more protectionist.
Y'all are mentioning red seats, and this might take a while, but like Navarro just said that these
Peter Navarro,
industries,
economic advisor to Trump,
yes,
went to jail for 4 months.
just said that these factories that they're planning on building, like they won't be built until like end of 25, early 26,
Oh,
right?
for sure.
Yeah.
At
So
best.
like,
Well, so I
when
think-
are we planning on this economic pain going away?
The way that Trump kind of does things, he drops a sledgehammer and he says, "This is the worst thing that's ever going to happen. I'm going to do these tariffs, and it's going to be this and that." But I can imagine, say, a number of countries coming back and saying, "Well, here are the major corporations in our country, and we want to manufacture in America to avoid these tariffs. But it's going to take us 3 years to build a plant." And Trump will be like, "Okay, I'll knock off the tariffs so
Yeah.
long as you can show me that you're making plans and you're buying land and you got an architect working on it, whatever, however he negotiates it." But he's going to negotiate from a place of strength, where he's basically going to say, "Look, we're not going to just outsource all of our manufacturing everywhere else. If you want to sell to a premium market, because our economy is bigger by than anyone else's in the world, it's a premium market. You want to sell your product to our people in our country, it will cost you something."
There's two types of scapegoating that I really can't stand about this. Like, one, the whole they're cheating us, right? You're poor because they're rich. The rich and powerful, like Indonesia, is like ripping you off because there's a trade deficit. That doesn't make any sense. Also, the Wall Street versus Main Street scapegoating, I really don't like that. Like,
You're pro Wall Street.
no, I'm saying there is a fundamental connection between Wall Street and Main Street. All of the like Main Street people that have 401ks and pensions, all of the retirees in your church that are like over 60, the freaking alternative to the mortgage that you get on your house is investing in companies,
Yeah.
right? That's called Wall Street, right?
Yeah.
There's a fundamental connection between Wall Street and Main Street.
You're saying
If
it's a
Wall-
false dichotomy.
Well, no, what I'm saying is if Wall Street crashes, that's terrible for Main Street because, because they are
okay.
interconnected.
But Wall Street. Okay, so trickle
And again,
down, so
yeah.
here would be another paradigm shift. Ronald Reagan was poked fun of for trickle down economics, right?
Say that again?
Ronald Reagan was poked fun of. He was picked on for advocating trickle down economics,
That's not what he
right?
called it.
Which is when you help. What's that?
It's not what he called it.
Sure.
Okay, voodoo economics. What?
Supply side economics.
Supply side. Okay, so when you basically give certain tax breaks or whatever to the wealthy, they produce, then they pay workers, and then the workers pay workers, and it sort of trickles down. That's fine. Okay, but at the end of the day, what Wall Street did is the people at the bottom of that were making our stuff in China. Okay, we brought China, who makes almost everything in this room. And basically the theory is that it's better that we make those things. So Wall Street made a choice. Wall Street makes money by outsourcing our manufacturing to slaves.
Hmm. There's
That is how-
where it gets theological.
That is how
too.
Wall Street makes its money, and then the stockbroker, the people who own the stocks, which by the way are about 10% of Americans own like 90% of the stocks.
But if I ask-
So the disparity of wealth on Wall Street is way skewed toward the elites, way, whereas Main Street is way skewed towards the average person.
Dang, so many places to go there. Let's just go with the slaves because I agree with you.
Yeah.
That's probably the closest thing to a theological implication on an article like this. What percent of the Chinese labor force do you think is like slave labor?
Well, wait. There's a couple different levels of slave. There's actually
That's what I'm saying,
incarcerated,
yeah.
like Uyghur Muslims in essentially
would agree,
concentration camps.
right.
And then there is
People working for $1 a day.
and then there's the terrible conditions. Sure, they're not being held against their will, but in essence, they are. So, what are we calling slave labor? Because if you're buying textiles from China, you're probably buying them from someone that has terrible conditions, whether they're imprisoned or not.
And so did Americans 100 years ago.
Great,
right?
but we're not doing it anymore.
Well, but what I'm saying is like we are gonna totally miss the forest for the trees if we say, hey, you're not allowed to work in a factory anymore, and the alternative is the rice fields. You know what I mean?
I don't know what you mean.
The alternative in America to the industrialized factories of 100 years ago was like agrarian economics, right? Which was horrible. If you want to look at how many people starved to death back when you're like subsistence farming versus like when you're working in a factory conditions are not great. And I'm really glad The Jungle was printed, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of those are just natural outcomes of an economy getting raised, of
I'm
a
not
rising
sure that's an
tide.
appropriate comparison because in China, the people laboring under these conditions are doing so as a result of the actions of that government.
Mm.
The other kinds of factors that you're talking about, like,
And I want to put a percentage on that, right? Like how many of them?
I'd like to know that.
Yeah. Like are at 100% slavery, which is like the Uyghur Muslims, right? What percentage of the labor force? I guess we have classes, like Class A slavery, right? That's the
Yeah.
Uyghur
Well, I
Muslims,
know that
right?
100% of them that complain
Yes.
about their government are going to have severe consequences.
You won't catch me simping for the CCP.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But what I am saying is in developing countries, right? Slamming the door behind us just because, you know, we got rich through industrialization and saying you're not allowed to do that seems...
Well, but if you lock out an industry, if everyone in America today stopped just buying textiles,
Sure.
just textiles from China, that would force China to have to do something different. I mean, it just would. Like so I don't. What is your solution? to
Well,
this?
I agree with textiles, but like this right here, this SM58 is going to be assembled in America, but the diaphragm in it might be made in like Hong Kong or something like that, right? There's a textile that's going to be like 100% manufactured in Indonesia or Thailand or something like that. But most stuff isn't just a single piece, right? Most stuff has like 80 different constituent parts that all come together, right? You've read I Pencil by
Yes.
yeah. Saying that nobody knows how to make a pencil because there are so many constituent parts. You have the chemist that knows how to get the rubber just right. You've got the
Sure.
Yes, but at this point, these are like kind of interesting academic arguments. But we're talking about like competing with an illegitimate government that has 1 billion people working for like slave conditions, and so it's different. Now, I think there's a lot of trade that we can do. For example, we could get coffee from Indonesia because we can't grow coffee.
we can't grow it here.
So,
yeah.
but that may be a non-tariffed item, or bananas from Honduras or whatever. That could be comparative advantage type, economics working. That's just normal free trade. The question. Let me ask it like
Sure,
this.
sure,
though.
sure.
Have you ever heard someone say something like, "Golly gee, my favorite bookstore just shut down"?
You mentioned Walmart in the article.
Okay, or golly gee, my my hardware store, my Ace Hardware just shut down because they can't compete with the big box stores who get all of their inventory from China. So you tell me, what is it worth to have a local bookstore that isn't outpaced by Amazon, or a local shop? Now you might say, well, that's protectionism. Yeah, okay, I'm at the point where let's protect. Somebody protect something.
But
somebody
This is
protect.
just like you've got mail, you guys.
The book
Yeah.
you buy from Amazon isn't printed in China, right? Going to your local bookstore and like looking at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble, that's not going to be printed in China.
Yeah.
Right? We got publishers here because we have forestry here. And like that added value, every step along the supply chain either comes forestry from Canada or, the extra added value of milling and printing that happens here.
Well, actually, we
Ken.
should
So
be
let me
forcing
say,
here.
Let me ask
Sure,
you
sure,
this.
sure.
I asked you earlier, what if you could wave your magic wand? What would the solution be to end the slave labor in China?
I'm not Peter Parker foreign policy, right? the Peter Parker foreign policy is great power comes great responsibility. It's our job to, what did Jefferson say? Go around the world finding monsters to slay.
No, it was Washington.
Washington, sorry.
End of his term address.
That terrifies me, right? Using the
But
either.
we've been so successful at that.
Yeah, no, how do you stop? How do you end the enslavement of the people in North Korea, right?
So-
A closed economy with no, import. Well, they
But
have
what's
some
the
import.
solution?
But
What's
yeah,
the
what is
solution?
it then?
I don't like imposing this kind of solution with, like you said, a sledgehammer.
Well, he starts with a sledgehammer, and you obviously walked it back.
Here's a start to
Sure,
a
sure.
solution, maybe. Right? It's to understand who has what responsibility. And I think we've kind of fundamentally forgotten what our relationship to the government is supposed to be, what our relationship to the president is supposed to be. His job is to secure the interest of the people that elected him.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's there to do. I think it's important and laudable if we want to improve conditions in other countries, but that's not the first responsibility of our government. Our government has a responsibility for the welfare of our people. And then maybe it's a more interesting question, how should we respond to slave labor in China as American Christians?
Individuals.
As consumers,
Yes,
as
that's my answer.
individuals. Okay.
Yeah.
But then what? Then how?
My answer.
What ought that be?
I would
think-
say we should put tariffs on China so high that the CCP gets destroyed by those peasant farmers in 6 months. Because there is
Uprising.
there is a thought that
But see, now
Okay,
we're,
Mr.
now we're doing this
Neocon,
again,
like,
right?
this is the
we're
neoconservative
dance
way.
puppets, and I think
regime.
not at
You're
all.
literally
We let
talking about regime change in
No.
China.
Well, yeah, yes.
Okay, Mr.
Yes,
Neocon.
not-
like.
No, dude, that is so stupid.
What?
Okay, did I say send in Navy SEAls? And did
No,
I say
let
send in
them
the
do it
CIA?
themselves, he's saying.
No, I did not say that. So take it back.
What's it?
No, take it back.
Sanction versus
Take
tariff.
it back. I'm not a neocon. What I said is,
Sure.
What
He's
I
an
said is,
old con.
you can exert, and there are people
Definitely a
that
con.
there are people that put the estimate at 6 months to a year that if we put enough economic pressure, because the CCP is a fraud, the CCP is the mafia, the CCP is a criminal gang. The people that run that joint are the richest people on earth, the most evil people that have ever lived, and they are not a legitimate government. The Chinese Communist Party is not a legitimate government. We need to stop treating them like they are. They subjugate their own people, and so I want the people, just like, because this is my foreign policy. Every people is responsible for their own freedom. Okay, they're responsible to fight their own battles. I do not like the CIA going into every country and overturning 60 coups and all that crap. Fine. But let the people, I think the people can rise up.
Whatever you
They
think.
almost did it with Tiananmen Square. We bailed the CCP out.
Yeah, whatever you think about the moral question, it has to be that way because we can't
Yeah.
secure the freedom
Right.
of all these other people.
I think the Chinese people are a
But
great
also
asset to
we-
us.
Yeah.
They were in World War II.
But like,
But I have concerns
think-
about manipulating this kind of to bring it manipulating China in a way to bring about conflict. To me, that's
for sure.
morally questionable.
Who gets hurt by, like, call it a tariff, call it a sanction, but like Castro wasn't hurt by our sanctions. He's rich no matter what, right? These fat cats in China are going to stay fat cats regardless of whatever 130% tariffs, 200, 500% tariffs. The fat cats are going to stay fat at the top of China, right?
I don't know about
The
that.
other
I don't-
thing that
I
concerns
disagree
me is the more that they
fundamentally.
feel cornered, the more it looks appealing maybe to blockade Taiwan. The more it looks appealing to
Yeah,
make
the
deals
whole thing
with
is
these
so
other bad
complicated. Yeah,
actors in
It's-
the world.
I get it. It's
The
5D
more
trade.
it's appealing
Yeah.
to try to move away from the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And so I'm not saying you're wrong about this. Like
It's a moral dilemma either way, though.
right.
Yeah,
So if we
I
continue
recognize
to
that.
empower the CCP, which we have done, and we continue to empower this criminal enterprise to subject its people, blood is on our hands for that too. You know,
Agreed.
if we let Mulan, Disney's new Mulan, literally be filmed like a mile away, I'm exaggerating.
From the Uyghur. No,
From
no.
the-
You can see beyond the mountains. You can
Yeah.
see the smoke from a Uyghur concentration camp if you watch the movie.
So,
Yes.
so you're
That's
telling me
really-
American corporations, are overlooking all this? I mean, this is like overlooking the Holocaust all over again. So
Yeah.
why is this okay?
Wait. Okay, so there's right south of them.
Yeah.
There's an even bigger Holocaust happening to the people of North Korea. Should we invade North Korea?
I haven't
He
said
never
we should
said
invade
invade.
anybody.
I'm not saying we should invade anyone, but if you have the moral ability,
I see what you're saying,
Yeah,
Ken.
if you have the
Yeah, no,
ability,
yeah.
right? So we're sanctioning them, right?
No, I
and
think-
are you saying we should call it a sanction instead of a tariff because of the slave labor and because we want to? Yeah, that's why I'm saying like sanctions don't hurt Castro, right? The Ayatollah Khomeini.
I disagree.
Because
I
we
think-
sanction-
I think is that well. I think there are ways that you. What did we do with the Soviet Union? How isn't, I mean, it's conventional wisdom, but maybe it's true. Didn't we spin them into oblivion until basically the government collapsed?
I think it collapsed on its own. The Berlin Wall was not to keep people from coming in from the capitalist countries.
Yeah.
It was to keep the people in the communists from going out.
I still think it limps along without Gorbachev and Reagan's relationship, and who knows what happens
Sure.
next.
Okay, we're out of time, but
I know.
last couple articles. Let's go
man.
quick. We're going to go
Well,
fast.
Well, maybe just one more.
Okay.
All right.
Because this one's
This is
really
a big
good
one.
and we don't have that much
Yeah.
time left. So let's
Okay.
just maybe end with this one.
All right. Well, I mean, talk about choosing the wrong poster boy for your policy. I think the left has done that here, unfortunately. So there is an illegal immigrant from El Salvador who
Mr. Garcia.
who was deported. Now, from what it looks like, best I can understand, is that this person had already been approved for deportation. 2 judges had looked at it and said, yes, we can deport him. They've also determined that he was a member of MS-13. And so we wanted this guy out. The only thing is that we couldn't send him to El Salvador because
He was feared for his life.
he had a legitimate claim about a fear for his life, about a gang that would have an interest in killing him there. And so he's deported to the wrong place. And so this has become a big cause celeb for some politicians. And the reason I wanted to bring it for discussion today was I just thought what a gross split screen it is that you have this much energy and time being devoted to a person.
Taxpayer dollars
Being devoted to
Who's
a
not a
person
citizen.
who's
Not a
not a citizen,
constituent.
had no right to be here. And best indications are he was part of a very violent gang.
and beat his
Meanwhile-
wife.
And,
Multiple times.
Right, and that I'm guessing Van Hollen didn't realize that when he went over there
Yes.
to meet with him.
And was arrested in Tennessee with 8 people in his vehicle. Clearly human trafficking.
Human trafficking is
you know,
very likely
is-
what that
yeah.
scenario was about,
Yeah.
right? So this is not someone who belongs in the country, and so he's getting all of this attention. He's kind of come to represent this left wing resistance to Trump's abusive practices on deportation, and yet I haven't heard Van Hollen say a single thing about the victims of illegal immigrant crime.
Well, and he's been asked, and then what's so funny is they ask him about that, and then he says, "Well, I don't want to change the issue or change the topic," and then he changes the topic to avoid answering the question about
Right.
exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
He's such a I have to think of a word I can say on
it's been
here.
pointed out, I think Peachy Keenan, who I follow on Twitter, and it's quite funny. She said, not her real name, of course. She said, if you look at, there was the guy that was like the peace broker with the Hamas people on like Yale's campus or something.
Oh, right.
Or Columbia's campus.
Mhm.
So they made a celebrity out of him.
Yep.
This MS-13 guy. And there was a handful of others I can't remember, but it's just like person after these are like 90-10 issues. These are 80-20 issues where they keep championing these like pretty awful people, and like a lot of them are ended up getting deported,
Right.
And so I think it's bizarre. Now I will say this though, they're winning on this immigration front. The left is winning big time. Because Trump understands like the clock is ticking to get out these 10 million people because those are potential voters. They remain potential voters, and unless Republicans will actually follow through, and they probably won't because they're in bed to Wall Street, not Main Street, because they're a bunch of Koch brothers losers. So unless they do something like E-Verify, right? Unless they create incentives where an illegal cannot work in this country, okay, unless in seasonal something like that, and they self-deport.
Right.
Trump understands like he can't deport all these people at this rate, and so
Correct.
in this way they're winning. I mean, it's a political loser, but I think in
To me,
terms
it
of
raises
policy,
the
they're
same
winning.
question that we were kind of batting around from a Christian perspective on the last issue. There's one way that the government should respond, and that seems pretty clear to me. I think you've got the right of it on that, because the government's responsibility is to the people of this country. Now, from a Christian perspective, should our response be any different? With this guy, I mean, I think clearly not. But presumably, a lot of the 10 million people that came here illegally under Biden are not this kind of
Right.
nefarious character who maybe came for more
Mhm.
understandable reasons. So,
Or even if they didn't come from understandable reasons, they're here now, they're nonviolent. I think the most interesting part of this is the question of due process, because the Supreme Court ruled that we should somehow facilitate getting this guy back here and giving him his day in court. And I have been really back and forth in my own mind about due process and just general fairness. What is fair to give illegal aliens?
I wanted to ask all three of you.
Yeah.
The 9-0 Supreme Court case. Do y'all agree with all 9 justices?
Was that a broad or a narrow ruling? Because
it was a ruling that bounced it back, and what was the language they used? They needed to facilitate the return
Right.
so that you could actually have due process. It wasn't he should be deported or not.
Right.
It was you actually needed to have a immigration court rule on this before you deported him.
But is it setting a precedent such that
He-
every illegal alien gets due process?
Which is the JD Vance take, right? What was
Is
the
it?
recent JD Vance tweet? He got into a spat with Jesse Singal.
Well, the heart of it was if you spend this kind of time and resources
Yeah.
trying to deport all 10 million people,
Mhm.
it'll never happen, and it'll bankrupt and overwhelm the system.
Mhm.
So
I think the burden of proof, to answer your question, I think the burden of proof is that you are a citizen, and if not, you have to go. I think the idea that we need an Alien and Sedition Act or some crap like that to get people out is insane. That's
Mhm.
insane.
The
Like,
fact
if
that
you're
we
not a
need
citizen,
one, or elaborate.
we can deport anyone who's not a citizen, unless you have a student visa, an
Anyone
H-1B
here
or something like that.
illegally.
If you're not here legally, I don't know why we have to come up with some crazy reason,
Litigate,
some alien violent. You're part of a gang and you're a terrorist organization, which is, by the way, true in many of those cases with Trende Arago and whatnot. But I don't know why the Trump administration has to defend themselves to these courts. Nobody elected these people to be president. Everything, just like with the trade and this, these were his issues.
I mean, this is literally-
If you believe in democracy, as in the president doing the will of the people, he said he was going to deport people.
Yeah.
He was going to initiate a trade war with terrorists. He was clear. He said it on every stage, every single speech, over and over and over again. This is what the people want.
a plurality,
so
not a
who-
majority.
No, it is a clear majority.
It's a majority of
over
It's
50 voted for Trump
56%.
polling.
Oh, yeah.
of voters.
56%
Of
Yes.
voters.
of I believe it's of voters, but it's
yeah.
definitely
That's
of
not-
Senate.
that's a different than 53% of the
Okay,
population.
well,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
the 56%.
Well, I tell you what, if you don't show up to vote, I don't care what you
We
have
don't
to
count
say.
your opinion.
And we're going to have that debate next week.
Yeah.
Yes,
But-
we are.
But so the question is, first of all, Trump right now is not coming after your tamale making grandma who is here illegally and just, staying under the radar and doing her thing. He's coming after criminals. So right now don't really have to have the discussion. This one sort of fell through the cracks bureaucratically. But the question on the table that I'm very curious about is if there is some question about whether someone's a criminal. Like for a while there was some question. Now it's looking like, okay, this is a bad dude.
Because
But-
of what?
Because of him beating his wife and the tattoos and the human trafficking and twice going to court.
Which tattoos?
And he has MS-13 symbols on his knuckles.
And if they want it to be
They
adjudicated legally,
stand for like
judges,
MS and what?
2 judges determined
Yeah.
that he was
Right.
a member of MS.
He had due process.
No. Those were bail hearings.
Yeah, they
were
didn't
judges.
fully
in,
determine.
they were judges in bail hearings, and they were saying, and it's just like what's the indictment? Any prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich, right?
Right.
But bail hearings are the
Grand
same
jury.
thing, right? You can deny someone bail for so many different reasons, and you just need it's not beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well-
it's not even
Okay, so
probable.
what's interesting
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
just
yeah.
say,
No
no,
one's
let's just say
arguing
that this
that
guy
point,
is
though, so I
innocent.
think it's
Let's
fine.
just say that he's
Sure,
not
sure.
in MS-13.
Sure.
He really fled. Those tattoos are a coincidence, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't beat
It's
his
illegal.
wife, whatever.
Marijuana is illegal. So I mean,
Okay, so
one of
but
them
let's
is.
say that do we give him his day in court is the question.
That's the
Do we
question.
give anybody
Yeah.
else their day in court? And I'm saying I think this is very tricky as a Christian and as an American. Like, what is the rule here? Because at some point it won't be this quote Maryland dad who turns out to probably be a monster. It'll be someone that maybe isn't a monster.
That's my point.
So I'm curious what you guys think. I don't know. I mean, I think I trend toward if you're not a citizen, you got to go. You don't get all our money that goes into due process, but I don't know.
I think to the extent that you can demonstrate that they're not here legally, at the same moment you can deport that person.
So, or
Now,
the Muhammad.
I wouldn't say that they have to prove. I think Evan, you said like the burden of proof is on you to prove that you're a citizen. That could and
Papers,
potentially
please.
snare some people we don't want to be deporting. But I think to the extent that we can demonstrate you're not a citizen, you can go. Now,
Well, we're
what I
doing
would
that to
like from a Christian perspective is to
Oof,
be able to
yeah.
carve out a space to where, like, yes, that's my policy, and it's not personal. I think it's not just rational. I think it's the essential role of the government because, again, the government exists
to protect
to
its
protect the
citizens.
interest of the citizens of this country, right?
Right.
And it's not even that we shouldn't. I don't think we should, but it's not even that we shouldn't protect all the people of the world. It's that we can't.
So-
protect
yeah,
them.
is
So what
Mexico
rights
Christian?
do these people have? Let's look at the Bill of Rights.
Well,
The
They have a right to life.
Well, okay.
Ooh.
I'm,
That's about it.
Well, he's saying the government exists, right? The Bill of Rights is one of the most important. Like you said, the government exists to protect the people, right? And the Bill of Rights is the part of our Constitution that protects the people, right? The
Citizens.
The main part of the Constitution doesn't say citizens. That's the question, right? What rights in the Bill of Rights do illegal immigrants have? You're both making the case for the Fourth Amendment, right? Illegal stops and seizures. Like, if you suspect he's an illegal immigrant, just go in there, round up all his person's papers and
Not if
effects.
you suspect. Now, and
Sure.
and I'm open that we might need to do some work around and putting parameters around like what constitutes the demonstration that this person is here illegally. But insofar as that they do meet that criteria, from that point, then I don't think it's a hard question.
I mean, what about like speech, religion, public assembly, press? Like, shall not be infringed, right? For the Second Amendment, what rights do they get?
That's
right?
a really good question.
And
Ken.
because it doesn't say citizens, right? It says the rights of the people.
That's good stuff.
the people.
That's the question.
It's implied.
They were talking about the people of this
America.
country. They weren't talking about the people of Venezuela.
And let me argue that Frederick Douglass said, and that also included me. He called it like a banker's check, a cashier's check that like wasn't cashed yet.
Yeah.
But when they were talking about
Aspirationally.
that, they were talking about me, even though they weren't talking about him at the time. He said, "I'm a person." Now you could say, okay, well,
hence the 14th Amendment answering the question of whether slaves can be citizens.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, birthright citizenship hopefully will be overturned as well.
hopefully be overturned,
Right.
which
Yeah.
mean the 14th Amendment will be. We'll have another amendment.
The
to correct
14th Amendment will be said to be about slaves who were essentially, upon being freed, were citizens of no country. And the 14th Amendment says if you were born here, then you're a citizen.
Yeah, I know.
That doesn't mean you get to be a tourist from Mexico, have your kid across the Rio Grande, and then your kid is a citizen. That's not what that means.
Then you are dealing with a lot of stateless people, right? There's a lot of
they're Mexican nationals in that example.
in that example.
Yes.
But not every South American country says like if your parents are citizens,
That's their
you're
problem.
a citizen.
That's their
Then
problem.
we have a bunch of what do we do with? It's the whole problem with Israel, Gaza is stateless people, right? Like when
We
I
determine
would not
every
say
every
that's
nation.
the whole problem.
Well, neither would Ken.
Every nation determines its requirements for citizenship, and being belong to a state. This is the way that we do it, and Argentina can do it however it wants to do it.
So, Ken, do you think that illegal immigrants are due process?
Yeah, I think we the people talks about we the people in similar notion to Frederick
anyone
Douglass.
that
Even
is-
if they weren't talking about me at the time, right? Like I'm a person, right? And I think that that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, right? Like I'm not a huge Constitution person. I'm a huge Bill of Rights person, and I'm a huge Declaration of Independence person. And one of the biggest problems that like the founders had with King George was the fact that he would just like scoop them up off the street and not give them their day in court, right?
Does a non-citizen to the United States have a right to be in this country? Assuming they're not a worker, student visa, that sort of thing.
Have a right,
Yes.
legally or morally? That's what I would argue.
Both.
Right?
Answer both.
I am an open borders person. I'll put all my cards on the table. I don't
They've
think.
always been on the table.
Sure, but I haven't stated it here. But
Yes.
I'm willing to paint that on myself. I don't think it's any business of the government who I want to like go into business with. Right? If I want to split rent with somebody, even what you said about E-Verify. If I want to go into business with somebody and have a business partner, whose business of the like?
It's the business of the government if that
Where
person
they live.
constitutes a danger to the people around them and the citizens of this country.
Have they
So
committed a crime?
If
Or
we don't
corporations-
understand, or if we're not even tracking the flow of people
Before
into
or
our
after they commit a
country,
crime is my question.
back up.
Sure.
But if we're not even controlling the flow of people into the country, if we don't even know who's here, in what sense are we a country? I mean, the border is
That's sort of
meaningless at that
definitionally.
point.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you can totally be a country with open borders, and
Okay.
you can
All right,
you
so
can
what's
issue
the difference between
sure.
an open border and no border?
And what do you mean? It's an agreement with another country. Also, I don't super like countries,
Okay.
but
Oh my goodness.
sorry,
The
sorry,
conversation's quickly going to devolve.
it's going to
into-
devolve
Yeah.
really quickly. But no, it's just an agreement. Like, hey, this is where we have jurisdiction. This is where we have jurisdiction. What about states? States have open borders with each other, right? Like I can go to Louisiana and go here, and then if I commit a crime in Louisiana or somebody there commits a crime here,
Right, because they're all
jurisdiction
subject to the
determines
same
that.
federal penalties.
No,
for breaking
jurisdiction
the laws
matters.
Of the country.
No.
Yes.
Some states have
so-
death penalties, some don't.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but if they commit a federal crime,
A federal crime is and thanks to like
we're all
Marbury and
subject to
those-
the same laws, and theoretically, we share a culture, a history,
Language.
a language, interests that are baseline the same, which is the prosperity and safety of the United States. We don't have the same kind of responsibility with Mexico. We can't flex the same kind of
Say that again. Like we don't have the same responsibility with Mexico.
Here's the thing. We're out of time, but
sorry.
I would say this is what is so extremely cynical about what is taking place. In America, it seems like violating the law is okay, but observing the law becomes the problem. And so Biden is allowed to let in 10 million people illegally as a matter of course. He never campaigned on that. He never said, this is what I'm going to do. He just did it. He took down Trump's effective policies. He let all these people in, and which is obviously a plan and a choice because Trump has reversed it in basically 30 days. Okay. And yet when we want to try to get people out, now the entire, the judicial, that is so cynical and so evil. What they have done, because they know that it's so much easier to break the law than to follow it. It is so much easier to let them in than to get them out. That the burden is going to be on Trump, and they're going to make him look bad. And I say, I don't care. I don't care how bad it looks. Get them out. They don't belong here. If you're not a citizen, you have to go.
It is pretty hard to take from the folks that gave you sanctuary cities. And like there's any number of laws that they just decided, you know what? We're not going to enforce this law. We're just not going to follow the law in this instance. But then, on the other hand, when you try to deport some of the people that have come here illegally, it's like, hey, it's the letter of the law. We are a nation of laws. You have to follow the law. That's just, it strikes me as so disingenuous.
That's why we're talking about
laboratories of democracy. We're the United States. The United States are, not the United States is,
But okay, so
we got to conclude this.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to come back and talk about just immigration with you two. I like hearing you two spar. This is fun. But I think for today, probably we need to call it.
Yeah, I know.
Leave them wanting more.
We have appointments and whatnot. Why don't we just wrap up there? I have said many times we need to do a whole TBT. What is our
Theology by the pint? Just say the whole thing.
Or
do what Ken does and say tippa.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway, people can't find you anywhere. So
I'm not telling you jokers where I work.
All right, but
no one's asking where you work.
You are at Theology by the Pint events.
Yes, so come see me. I'll hand you a drink.
And Taylor,
I have a blog. You can also email me. The blog is neolology the email is neolology@gmail.com, and the blog is neolology.com.
With
I
two
will
L's.
look you up.
With two L's. NEILLOLOGY.
So really 3 L's.
That's not the point.
Yeah, two in succession.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Sarah Stone. You can find me on our website, theologybythepint.org, as well as Evan and Ken, because he's on our board. And you can also come to our events. May 13th is the next one. It's going to be a doozy. It's going to be a lot of fun. That's at Heights Church. And we're going to have barbecue. It's going to be really awesome. You should
What's the
come.
topic?
Topic, creation and evolution.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Sorry, you may probably said that. Anyway, thank you all for listening. I'm Evan McClanahan, pastor at First Lutheran. Until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.
Peace.